Derek had spent years building his life from the ground up. As a successful IT professional, he finally bought his dream home in an upscale neighborhood, away from the chaos of the city. It was a peaceful retreat, until his neighbor Karen moved in. At first, everything seemed fine, but recently, Derek noticed something strange. His Wi-Fi had been running slower than usual, and it was starting to drive him crazy. At first, he thought maybe too many devices were connected, but as the issue persisted, he began to investigate. Something wasn't right. Sitting in his living room, Derek logged into his router's settings. His jaw tightened when he saw it. An unfamiliar device connected to his network. Who was using his Wi-Fi? He hadn't authorized anyone to do so. Without hesitation, he changed the password and hoped that would be the end of it. But the next morning, as Derek sat on his porch sipping coffee, he saw her, Karen Whitmore, storming toward his front door. She had an air of entitlement about her, one that Derek had noticed before but had ignored. This time, however, it was different. Karen didn't knock. She barged right in, her expression seething with anger. "Did you change your Wi-Fi password?" Karen demanded, her arms crossed tightly. Derek blinked in surprise. He barely knew this woman. Why was she so upset? "Yes, I did," Derek replied coolly, not understanding why she would care. Karen's face turned bright red with fury. "Why the hell would you do that?" she hissed. "I've been using your Wi-Fi for months. Now I can't do anything." Derek's eyes narrowed in disbelief. "You've been stealing my Wi-Fi?" he asked, incredulous. Karen scoffed, as though she couldn't understand why he was even questioning her. "It's just the internet. You people always make a big deal out of nothing. It's not like it cost you anything extra." Derek felt his pulse quicken. This woman had been using his Wi-Fi for months without his permission, and now she was acting like it was his fault. He took a deep breath, trying to keep his composure. "It's my Wi-Fi. I pay for it. I don't owe you access." That's when the rage in Karen's eyes turned into something darker, something manipulative. "Oh, I get it now," she sneered, her voice dripping with superiority. "You don't belong here. You think you can just come into this neighborhood and start playing games with people who actually belong here. I'm calling the police." Derek was stunned. Before he could even react, Karen pulled out her phone and dialed 911. He couldn't believe what he was hearing. She was calling the cops on him because he had changed his own Wi-Fi password. As Karen spoke to the dispatcher, Derek's mind raced. He knew this wasn't just about Wi-Fi. It was something far deeper, but he didn't have time to think. He could hear the sirens in the distance, getting louder by the second. With a final glance at Karen, Derek stepped inside. The game was on, and he was ready to see just how deep her lies went. Derek stood by the window, his eyes locked on the approaching police car. His mind raced, but his body remained calm. He knew Karen had already woven her web of lies, but what he didn't know was just how deep it went. He couldn't help but feel a surge of anger. Karen had crossed the line this time. The police car pulled up in front of his house. Two officers stepped out, one tall and composed, the other shorter and stockier. Officer Jordan and Officer Miller were used to dealing with neighborhood disputes, but Derek could tell this wasn't going to be a typical call. Karen wasted no time. As soon as the officers stepped onto the porch, she rushed toward them, face flushed with fake distress. Her voice shook with false urgency. "Officers, thank God you're here," she cried, pointing at Derek with trembling hands. "This man is harassing me. He changed my Wi-Fi password without my permission. He's trying to hack into my devices. I feel threatened." Derek clenched his jaw, trying to hold his temper. He had seen enough. Officer Jordan raised an eyebrow, his expression skeptical. "Ma'am, slow down. What exactly is the situation here?" Karen took a deep breath, dramatically trying to compose herself. "I was just sitting in my house minding my own business when my internet suddenly stopped working. I thought it was just a glitch, but when I checked, I realized he had changed the password. When I confronted him, he threatened me and refused to help. He's a hacker. He's dangerous." The younger officer, Officer Miller, glanced at Derek. He stood still, arms crossed, not showing any sign of aggression. If anything, he looked completely unfazed, almost bored. "So, let me get this straight," Officer Miller said, unable to hide a chuckle. You're calling the cops because he changed his own Wi-Fi password? Karen snapped her head toward Officer Miller, eyes widening with fury. It's more than that, she hissed, her voice rising. He's been hacking my devices. You need to check his computer. He's dangerous. Derek stood up straighter. This wasn't just about Wi-Fi anymore. Karen had taken things to a dangerous level. He needed to expose her, but he would do it the right way. He turned to Officer Jordan. This woman has been using my Wi-Fi without my permission for months. I changed the password because she's been stealing from me. Derek explained calmly. She came to my door demanding access after I changed it. When I refused, she called you, fabricating a story to make me the villain. The officers exchanged a quick glance. Officer Jordan didn't flinch, but Officer Miller's face began to show signs of doubt. Okay, let's get some clarity here, Officer Jordan said. Ma'am, you're claiming that he's hacking into your devices? Do you have any proof of this? Karen hesitated. Her mind raced for an excuse, but Derek could see the panic starting to set in. No, but, Karen stammered. But you've been using his Wi-Fi for months without asking? Officer Miller interjected. And now you're accusing him of hacking? Derek's mind was already racing ahead. The evidence he had gathered could end this farce in a heartbeat. I can prove it, Derek said calmly. He walked over to his desk, opened his laptop, and plugged in the USB drive he had prepared earlier. The evidence was clear. Karen's confident smirk faltered as Derek pulled up the router history. He began clicking through the logs, showing the unfamiliar IP addresses that had been using his internet. But there was more, much more. Here, Derek said, pointing to the screen, I can prove she's been visiting illegal sites and criminal activity. The logs show several transactions linked to fraud, and there's even a trace of identity theft going through shady websites. This isn't just about Wi-Fi anymore. She's been using my network for far worse. The officers leaned in closer. The tension in the room was palpable. That's not true, Karen shrieked, her face pale. You're making this up. You called the cops on me over a password, Derek replied, his voice ice cold. But you didn't know I'd be the one exposing your crimes. The officers stood still, their expressions now serious. Officer Miller gave a low whistle. This isn't looking good for you, ma'am. Karen's face had drained of color as she stood frozen, completely caught off guard by Derek's calm demeanor. The full weight of the situation was beginning to hit her. She had thought she could manipulate the system, call the police and turn the tables, but it was all unraveling in front of her eyes. Officer Jordan stood silently for a moment, his eyes scanning the screen that Derek had presented. The truth was clear. The evidence was irrefutable. Karen had been using his Wi-Fi for much more than just browsing. Fraudulent activity, hate speech, and illegal transactions painted a picture far darker than anyone could have imagined. Derek could see Karen's composure cracking. She no longer had the confidence she'd had when she stormed onto his property just minutes ago. Now, she looked desperate. Her hand trembled as she reached for her phone, probably thinking about dialing another number to escape the consequences. You know what, Karen? Derek said slowly, his voice steady but firm. You've been exploiting my Wi-Fi for months, using it for illegal activities, and now you've called the police on me. You thought you could get away with it all, but I've got the proof. You're the one in the wrong. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish, gasping for words, but none came. Her eyes darted from the officers to the laptop, then back to Derek, trying to find a way out. This is all a mistake, she sputtered, her voice cracking with fear. I didn't do any of that. It's all lies. You're trying to set me up. Officer Miller, who had remained mostly silent, shook his head in disbelief. Ma'am, the evidence is clear. You've been using his Wi-Fi illegally, and the transactions, fraudulent and illegal websites, not to mention the identity theft. That's serious. You're the one breaking the law here. Karen's last bit of bravado dissolved. She stepped backward, a look of pure panic in her eyes. No, this isn't happening. You have to believe me, she pleaded, her voice rising in pitch. I didn't do anything. I'm the victim here. But her words were falling on deaf ears. Officer Jordan folded his arms and let out a long sigh. Ma'am, we're going to need to look deeper into your activities. He turned to Officer Miller. We need to call in the cybercrime unit. Karen's face twisted with disbelief. "No, you can't do this. I'm the victim here, not him," she screamed, lashing out in a final desperate attempt to control the situation. She lunged at Derek, her manicured nails aimed for his face, her body shaking with fury. But before she could make contact, Officer Miller was there, grabbing her by the wrist and twisting her arm behind her back. "That's assault," he said, his voice calm but firm, "and it's just another charge to add to your list." Karen let out a strangled cry as the officers swiftly restrained her, pulling her away from Derek. She kicked and screamed, but her efforts were futile. She was no longer in control. Derek watched as Karen was handcuffed and led outside, still shouting at the officers and trying to twist the narrative in her favor. But it was over. The police weren't buying her story anymore. She was caught. Outside, neighbors had begun to gather, drawn by the commotion. Some were filming, others were whispering. They had seen Karen's dramatic display moments ago, and now they were witnessing her downfall. As the officers shoved Karen into the back of their patrol car, Derek stood on his porch, arms crossed, a small, victorious smile creeping across his face. "Karma's a real thing," he muttered to himself, watching as the car pulled away. For the first time in a long while, Derek felt relieved. The tension that had built up over the past days was finally washed away, and he was free from Karen's harassment. Karen's arrest quickly made waves across the neighborhood. Within hours, her privileged facade crumbled, and the real truth about her entitlement and criminal activity became public. The footage from the neighborhood cameras, showing her erratic behavior and false accusations, was shared widely on social media, going viral in no time. Her actions had completely backfired. Karen, once the self-proclaimed queen of the neighborhood, was now the object of ridicule and disdain. The local news caught wind of the story, and the headline was brutal. "Racist neighbor arrested after attacking black neighbor over Wi-Fi. Shocking cybercrime evidence revealed." Soon after, the neighborhood association held an emergency meeting and unanimously voted to ban Karen from the community. Her once pristine house, now a symbol of her downfall, was about to go into foreclosure due to mounting legal fees and the public disgrace. As for Derek, he finally got the peace he had longed for. His Wi-Fi was faster than ever, and the intrusive neighbor was no longer an issue. He sat on his porch one evening, sipping coffee and reflecting on the bizarre turn of events. His phone buzzed with a message from a friend. "Bro, you're a legend." She really thought she could get away with that. Derek chuckled to himself. He had always believed that justice would prevail, but now he knew for sure. Karen had underestimated him, and her entitlement had been her undoing. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Derek took a deep breath, enjoying the quiet peace he had worked so hard to maintain. Justice had been served. What do you think about Karen's dramatic downfall? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed the story, hit that like button, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss another wild tale like this. Share this story with a friend who needs a reminder that karma always finds a way.